I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And again, we'll take a moment just to bring to mind our motivation. That the reason for discussing and contemplating, studying a bit of the Dharma today. Remembering how we are, it was basically a compassion in bodhicitta. So bringing to mind how we ourselves are subject to all kinds of suffering, difficult experiences, and that then others, countless who are countless, are exactly like us also, and wanting happiness and not wanting to suffer. But that despite that wish deep in their hearts, that just like us, they're subject to so many different kinds of difficulty, loss, physical problems, and emotional difficulty, and suffering. And so developing a sense of loving kindness and compassion for them, wishing to liberate them, ourselves, and also all others from suffering. We're wishing to lead all beings to full enlightenment, to liberation from suffering, enlightenment. So we feel, okay, so for that reason I'm studying, contemplating, and discussing the Dharma. Motivated by loving kindness, compassion, altruism, and the bodhicitta attitude. We can come together to discuss. So, in the actually, first of all, it's quite. Today is the it's sometimes called Lama Tsongkhapa Day. It's the anniversary of Lama Tsongkhapa's. Actually, I think it's the anniversary of his. They call it his parinirvana, but basically his death. So it's auspicious that we're discussing impermanence and death today in the Lam Rim, in a text written by Lama Tsongkhapa, actually. So we're studying this middle-length Lam Rim, which actually Lama Tsongkhapa wrote near the end of his life. It was one of his later works in his life. And later in the afternoon, for those of you who feel like staying, we'll actually talk a little bit about Lama Tsongkhapa's life, but won't go into that too much today. But anyway, so in this text by Lama Tsongkhapa, we're up to the section on impermanence and death. And where we left off, for those of you who have the text, we left off on page 53, but we left off, I just want to go back for a moment to right where we left off, which was the section on what kind of attitude you want to generate when contemplating death. I just want to remind us of that, and then we're going to go into the actual way of contemplating this topic. One thing that I just want to remind you, first of all, because also some of you might not have been here. One thing Lama Tsongkhapa says very clearly at that point is he says the point of contemplating impermanence and death in this context, and he's very clear. He says, it's not like. He says the point of this is not to generate the kind of fear that people who aren't spiritual generate, right, who aren't practicing a spiritual path. So he's warning us. He's saying, if you start meditating on permanence and death, and if all it does is get you scared and depressed, you're not doing it right. Right? Then then stop. You're doing something wrong. Right? And because what he's pointing out is that if a worldly person who has no spiritual practice at all contemplates impermanence and death, then they just feel, oh, I'm going to miss my family, I'm going to miss my friends, I'm not going to have my money, I'm not going to have my house, how depressing. And he says, if that's what you think, then don't do it like that. And what he says is that, what he says here, right, is that if you contemplate impermanence and death in the way recommended, and in the context of a spiritual practice, then what it does, the result that you should experience internally, is a sense of urgency, passion, great energy for your own practice of the path, to be of benefit to yourself and others, right? And so he's pointing out, if you contemplate it correctly, that's the kind of mental state, that's the kind of inner experience that should arise. And actually, on that point, so in other words, I'll just say one more thing about what he's saying, right? So part of what he's saying, right, is that if you contemplate correctly in the context of having understood from a spiritual point of view how precious your human life is, this special kind of human life, right? We went over that. And your spiritual potential that you have, that other beings don't currently have, non-human beings, and not people who don't have the kind of unique circumstances you have. And then if you're meditating on these points about impermanence and death, it gives you this deep motivation to use your life in a meaningful way, right? And to use each moment in as meaningful a way as you can. I want to go off for a moment from the text and elaborate just a little bit and say a couple of other thoughts. I should say these are just 2 or 3 quick thoughts of mine that Lama Tsongkhapa doesn't mention here. So, but I just wanted to mention this too. Like another benefit on this point is, but the Lamas say this. I should not think it out. It's just he doesn't say it right here. Is this? I just wanted to point something out, which is like, so one is it motivates you to do spiritual practice. Another I just want to mention is like, it also so we say this, improves how you relate to others. Okay? And I just wanted to mention something about that. Did you ever notice, like, if you yourself, children probably have the experience, like, if you've lost someone who you've loved, right? Like, what happens? What do people, actually, what's your own experience, and if you're with somebody else, right? There's ordinarily this experience where somebody might say, oh, I wish I had done this, or I wish I hadn't done that. And things like, actually, nobody wants, if someone you love dies, nobody wants your last conversation to have been a fight, for example. And nobody wishes you had screamed at the person more, right, or something like that. Or I wish I had, Usually the wish is to have been more kind. And the point I'm making on that is just this, is that when we have the wrong, Lama Tsongkhapa pointed out here, right, ordinarily we have this wrong view of permanence. When you have the wrong view of permanence, actually, I say somebody you love, but the problem is that actually if you watch the process of grieving, actually, it's love, what happens is our love is mixed with expectations, with egocentric agendas, with sort of self-centered ideas of how this person should be. And if you ever notice when somebody dies, of course, this is it. You don't have any choice. You can try to hold on to the egocentric agendas you have, but you're not getting anything from the person at that point, right? And a big part of grieving actually is sort of, the pain that we're experiencing as we are forced to give up our egocentric agenda in relation to that person. Ordinarily, when people grieve, what they do is they're forced because of death to give up their egocentric, so they go through a lot of pain giving up their egocentric agenda for that person, and when they're finally done with that, they go project that egocentric agenda onto some other person. That's often the pattern. And another benefit of meditation on impermanence and death is, if you meditate on this, it helps to realize that you can have, sometimes it's like, if you don't meditate on impermanence and death, it's really hard to separate out attachment and egocentric agendas from our love. Yes, we have a moment of love and kindness for somebody, But then we develop all these agendas. They should treat me like this, they should be like that. And actually, you know, when somebody treats you that way, like you really appreciate, human beings tend to appreciate quite a bit when somebody treats you lovingly, right, and kindly. But you also know how it feels when you look at the person and you think, oh, they want me to be this, but that's not who I am. They're trying to pressure me to be a different way, and right, and that's where you start to feel uncomfortable. Right? So meditation on permanence of death also is helps to separate those two. So it helps, and actually, if you like, say this, like, if you spend time around somebody, like, part of what's a relief, actually, I'll just share this experience. Like, you know, I spend time with, you know, some genuine Tibetan, you know, like really good practitioners. Part of what's a relief is like you can look and go, wow, this person actually doesn't have some egocentric agenda for me. Like they're being nice to me, but they don't then feel I need to be this for them or that for them, which ordinary people always is there. And it's like so relaxed. It's like, oh my goodness, I can finally relax. Like they don't need me to be something particular. So you can give that gift to others if you meditate on impermanence and death. It's part of what I'm suggesting. You know, so it motivates you to actually do formal meditation practice, but it also motivates you to relate to others in a different way. And if you've been meditating on impermanence and death, and then like, let's say your egocentric agenda for somebody who you care about comes up, right? But then if you have the thought, I'm going to die today. I could die today. They could die today. It's like, you can like sort of relax and not have to try to force the person to be something that you want them to be or something like that, which is what we ordinarily are doing in our all kinds of, right, our friendships, our romantic relationships, our family relationships, right? It's like we're all sort of, let's just say, we're all trying to, wanting somebody, each other to be something particular that's egocentric. So the best way to stop that is meditation on impermanence, really. Does that make sense? Because then you can sort of feel, if you actually meditate on that, you feel, it's not, first of all, it feels, it's like that feeling after the, you know, when the person, like if you sit with somebody whose relative died and they argued the last day or something, right? You know, the person like has some feeling like, oh, wish I hadn't done that. You can actually feel that while you're alive with the other person, so then you don't have to regret it later, and then you treat the person with more respect. I just wanted to add that in there. It doesn't say that specifically in this part, but other people have made this observation.
Just thinking it loud here, Dr. Lama. Probably of the three poisons, it's the attachment that we are talking about mostly, or maybe of the 12 cycles of life. Probably we're talking about grasping and clinging when we talk about this part of meditation. Would that be correct?
Yeah. So that's what I was talking about. Kind of, grasping or attachment. Yeah, that decreases. They say also meditate, and then actually, because you know, if you think about it, the other mental afflictions come from grasping. You know, so it would also decrease anger, right? Because whereas why do we get angry? It's like, so if I'm grasping, let's say I'm grasping at you, and then somebody else comes along and says, oh, he sucks, don't like him.
Right.
You know, then I may get angry at that person. But it came from my grasping, right? I want him to be my friend. Now this person ruined our friendship, now I'm angry at them. You know, so the other ones are usually, mostly are secondary to grasping. Yeah, derivatives. So you're right. It decreases grasping. And therefore decreases the other mental afflictions. But, okay, so now we'll go into the action. So now Lama Tsongkhapa says, so then how in this system does one actually cultivate? What's his recommendation of how to actually cultivate a mindfulness of death and impermanence? And I mentioned this last time very briefly, that in, actually in the Buddhist tradition, there are many different ways of cultivating a mindfulness of impermanence and death. And Lama Tsongkhapa actually, in the context of the way he presents it, you'll see he presents many different ways. But in Lama Tsongkhapa's presentation, and actually in all of his, in the Great Lam Rim also, and the Short Lam, he consistently presents this particular way of meditating on permanence of death, because he found that it was particularly helpful psychologically and spiritually for people. And so one way of calling it is, the actual way he calls it here is meditation with 3 root thoughts, 9 reasons, and 3 decisions. So there's a structure to it. Basically, it's a 3-part. There are 3 major parts. And each part has three reasons. That's why. So there's each major part. There are three main parts, right? And 3 times 3 is 9. So there are three main parts, and each of those main parts has three things to contemplate, basically. And if you contemplate those, the three decisions, each one has its own natural outcome, in a sense. So the first main point of the three main points is the certainty of death, right? Or it is certain we will die, or the certainty of death. And again, remember, right, what we said when we began this whole section on impermanence and death, that the goal here, I mean, intellectually we all know everybody's going to die. Right? The goal here is to, how should I say this, is to sort of work with yourself to overcome your own internal grasping at the feeling that you're not going to die, right? The feeling of permanence, the wrong view of permanence. So this is not an intellectualized endeavor. You get that, right? I mean, there's an intellectual element to it, but it's mainly to refute this kind of this way we grasp, actually. So I just want to say that it's helpful if you start off by understanding or checking introspectively, and seeing how you, let's sort of say this, how you don't think about the fact that you're impermanent. You know, how you're sort of feeling naively when you're not, if nobody's sort of bringing this up to you, your naive feeling is sort of as if you're sort of very solid and permanent, because then, you know, as we've talked about, because if you hold on to that wrong conception, you generate all kinds of grasping and so on, and also you don't use your life in a meaningful way. That's part of the problem. But okay, so you have to relate to. So the point I'm getting at really is, one way of saying it is, you have to relate to each of these points in relation to yourself. That's the So on this point of the certainty of death, the first contemplation is death will definitely come, and there's no way of escaping. And this one's important, actually. I'll just get into a little bit. Let's say this right. Like, so the idea here, right, is that we have these sort of unconscious, mostly, like graspings or sort of attachments, and different people are different, but this sort of feeling like of insulation, like I insulate, like, so you might say I insulate myself, right? And different people insulate themselves in different ways, right? Like, so some people might insulate themselves and feel, oh, I have some kind of feeling of solidity and permanence because I have some status, or because of my wealth, or because of my home, or because somebody, like, so for example, actually you can see it psychologically, like if you're, let's say it, if you're in a place where there are, let's say it, people who seem quite vulnerable, actually lately, like, so for example, if you, actually lately if you see, there's been a lot in the news, right, refugees, then there's some feeling in oneself, if you check honestly, of, so say this, I mean, sometimes there can be a feeling of empathy and compassion, but there can also be a kind of feeling of, they're quite vulnerable, but I'm a citizen, right? That's by status, right? Or, oh, but I have a nice house, or I have enough to feed myself, or some, which is true, I mean, it's not invalidating it, but some feeling as though, therefore I'm more permanent than them. Which actually isn't true. If you're driving through an area where people are quite, and I'm using driving as an example, right? And where other people don't have a vehicle, right? Then there's some feeling of, oh, I'm somehow safer from death. Actually, being in a vehicle, you're less safe from death, probably, statistically. But for something around is probably safer, but. So the idea here is you're trying to refute this idea that somehow, because of something like where you identify with certain aspects of yourself or your life, in order to sort of grasp at a feeling of permanence. And so in this contemplation, what you actually think is, there's no place you can go, and there's nothing you can have or be that helps you escape. So you think, okay, no matter how much, first of all, no matter how fit I am, fitness doesn't prevent death. Like, actually the most fit people in the world also die. Now you can think, no matter how much wealth I were to accumulate, which doesn't help at all, right? Like kings, there's kings and queens also die. Billionaires die, same as anybody else. No matter what possessions I have, none of them can prevent me from dying. There's no place I can go. Like if I go some people, if I go someplace warm, that won't stop. Actually, if you but check for yourself, right? Like sometimes you people, how do I say it? Like you might feel like I was just the other day, I was thinking about earthquakes, right? And I thought I was thinking of Nepal, and then I was thinking of there was something about California and the risk of earthquake. I was thinking, oh, okay, I don't want to be in those places. Right? Then I won't die. Which of course, then somebody can point out, well, then yesterday somebody said to me, well, we're kind of in ground zero for a likely terrorist attack. Oh, where can I go? Right? But there is no, there's some idea, you check for yourself, right? There's some feeling in us. They might say, oh, if I go there, oh no, then there's hurricanes. Where can I? But there is no place. Right? There's no place I can go that's safe. Actually, it doesn't exist. But if you check, you'll have some grasping, right? I mean, you see what I'm getting at? There is really a feeling like that. If somebody were to say, oh, there's going to be a horrible disaster here, you would feel, oh, let me go somewhere else. Right? As if I can be safe there. And what this is saying is that's your subconscious sort of grasping at this idea that you can find some place where you'll be safe and protected. There is no such place. Actually, check for yourself, right? If you see, I'm just giving this example of, I'm just going on, I hope you'll excuse me but for a moment, but I was just using this idea of the refugees. Right? Check for yourself. Do you have some feeling of, phew, that won't happen to me? Actually, the entire history of the human race is a history of, right? In other words, why are people, if you study, what's the word? Those studies about migrations and also of genetic, studying history through genetic. Whereas the only reason that people are anywhere other than where they start off in a certain part of Africa is because of over and over again, war, natural disasters, famines, floods, right? So that people fled somewhere, right? That's why people are anywhere. So actually, the entire history of humanity is one of having to flee because of horrific disaster after horrific disaster. There's think about why would anybody have come to the United States? Right? It's a history of many, many, many fleeing from horrible disasters. So your entire genetic history is one of fleeing from disasters, actually, and that's going to continue on into the future. So actually, it's an anomaly. If you die before you have to flee somewhere, you're fortunate. But that's not been frequently the case. So anyway, here you can just go through it, right? So you can think of each, and of course, like you say, some people have the idea, I'm powerful, right? But of course, actually, the most powerful people in the history of the planet, of course, they died. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, whatever, they all died. Kings and queens also died. So the idea here, one is just you can contemplate, all these points, right? There's no place I can go. There's nothing I can do. I remember Ken Rinpoche one time pointed out. He said that this is funny. There are certain Vajrayana tantric meditations where they say then you can become. They have this word a holder of life or something an immortal being. And he says those immortal beings they also die, which I thought was very funny. He said look around. Do you see any of them here? So Ken Rinpoche said don't think that even and he was if Shakyamuni Buddha is not here, then Lama Tsongkhapa is not around. if you know, they say sometimes they say Padmasambhava achieved immortality, but you can't find him. Right? If you go around like look for his address, you won't find it. You know, you won't find him around. So he said, even if you achieve immortality, still you're going to die. So there's no immortality, really. You know, not in that sense. The point being, there's no spiritual escape from death either. You know, the Buddha died. Right? So if you, unless you say, so that there isn't. And it says here, there's no mantras, no medicine. You know, and that's also true, right? Doctors, you know, you say, oh, medicine will keep me alive, but of course doctors die too. And if you, even if you have enough money to pay for the best medicine, it won't stop death. It might stop it for a few extra days, a few weeks, something. And so you get the point here is that you contemplate in relation to yourself. And I'm just elaborating. I mean, when you actually do the formal meditation, you just sit down and you can go through these points. But to make it more, I find it more effective if you actually notice. That's why I'm giving these real life examples. Is if you check for yourself, if you start to do this meditation, you'll notice, you can actually notice for yourself, oh, what do I grasp at? You know, when I hear somebody else, Arya Deva says, you know, when we hear someone else died, right, he says ordinary people don't ever think, oh, soon that's me. And he said, but Dharma practitioners recognize, oh, we're exactly the same. That already happened to that person. It'll also happen to me. So anyway, you get the point here of this one. So I mean, one is you just contemplate there is no place to go. There's no place. There's no status. There's no possession. There's no. But you can also notice in yourself, what do you grasp at that sort of unconsciously you sort of associate with some feeling of, oh, I'll be permanent. You know, and check for yourself, right? Like if you were on a, how should I say this? Like, it really is like that. I think oftentimes we do insulate ourselves. Like, you know, so if you sit down in a luxury car, for example, right? If you were like, check. I think that's part of the attraction. Is there some feeling of like, oh, I'm insulated, especially if the door closes. You know, that closes with, then you feel, oh, I'm somehow like insulated. Or if you're like in a house that feels very solid or something, there's some feeling, oh, okay, nothing can get me. There's some kind of feeling subconsciously like that, but it's not, you know, and part of this is to just challenge ourselves to realize, oh, I do have that. This feeling of insulation from reality, as if I'm somehow escaped or like, what's the word, like not subject to that. And to recognize, wow, that's a delusion. And then part of this is overcoming our delusions.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to point out about the recent study they did on Red Cross and some other relief agency. Whenever earthquake happens, or for that matter, some of the floods or some of the pictorial things that we see in CNN, the first reaction as a human being we have is like, oh, I'm glad it's not me. And that's where you actually click the buttons to donate and actually you end up giving the money. So that's probably ties out to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, then the next contemplation of these three, right? So these are the three on the certainty of death. So the second of these three contemplations, the way they call it is, my lifespan cannot be increased and diminishes incessantly. What Lama Tsongkhapa points out here, he quotes a sutra, the Descent to the Womb Sutra, where he says, in our time period, the maximum lifespan is about 100 years. And actually, you know, of course, most people don't make it to 100. But the idea is this, is when you're born, the Buddhists sometimes use this term, they say there's untimely death, right, where somebody dies, you know, because of an accident or because of they were murdered or something of that sort. But there's also a maximum lifespan possible, which is true of our bodies, right? These kinds of human bodies, we have, what's the word, have like an expiration date or something. They can only last so long, right? And actually, you've seen that. Have you ever seen, like, I noticed that you'll see this for yourself, but I mean, I remember this with, I remember my grandfather, like, there were many times where he almost died, and he got some effective treatment or did something, but then there came a point when he was, when he was 89, where just everything started failing, one after, it was like, and up until that point, he had always been very, like, he'd had a very strong will, and he said, I'm going to fight I'll fight to live, basically. And he went to doctors, and he exercised, and he took medicine. Then there came a point in '89 where it was clear, the maximum achievable lifespan for that body was done. It was like one thing after another was failing. It was just like, oh, okay, there's nothing to fight this time, because it's not a particular infection. It's what you call dying of old age. In Buddhism, they say the real cause of death is birth. Whereas, as soon as you're born, that's the main cause of death. There could be secondary causes of death, like an accident or something, but the real cause so once you're born, it's already guaranteed that you're going to die. And so what they're talking about here is, so it's actually a meditation where you meditate like this. So you recognize, okay, so there's a I may die before that, but there's definitely an end point, right, for this body, this life. And I'm moving towards that, and I never get a break. Whereas there's never a second where it's like I'm on holiday from approaching my death, right? It's always being used up. And there are many ways to meditate on this point. So I just want to go, one that I remember Lama Zopa Rinpoche sometimes had people do was, you have them actually watch the second hand on their clock. If you don't have a second hand, you have you can do the digital number. But it's like a countdown, right? It's like...
listening to the clock.
Yeah, you can also listen to it or something. But then you recognize, oh wow, that's like my countdown towards the end of my life. And no matter what I do, I can't add on. It's not like I can say, well, gosh, it's running down, let me live to 200. You can say it, but it's not going to work. And so that's one way of meditating on this point. Somebody else did it with an hourglass. They watched that. They watched the sand falling down, and sort of recognizing, wow, the moments of my life are passing like that. And the hourglass is a good metaphor because you can't fill up the top one again. It's not like it's open on top. You can keep pouring sand in. Another one here that Lama Tsongkhapa mentions is he says it's like falling off a cliff. He says birth is like falling off a cliff, which I thought is a very visceral. I would do that when I would think of being pushed off the Empire State Building or something like that. Like so you're falling, and there's a certain length of time, and then you hit bottom. That birth was like that. That you're continually falling through your life, and there's no way to stop. And actually, the only way to stop is to die quicker. Or if you die on the way down. So either you die on the way down or you die when you hit the bottom, but there's no other way out of that existential situation. There's another way of doing that is with the breath, actually. So like we oftentimes meditate on our breath, like mindfulness, right? And this one you can meditate on your breath, but you think there's a limited number of breaths this body will ever take. Each breath I'm taking is it's a countdown, so to speak. Like that. Anyway, there are many ways to meditate on this point. Shanti Deva, I'll just read that quote. He says, "This life decreases constantly, day and night, without respite. If from nowhere there is an increase either, how could I not die?" He's making the same point. There's no way to add on, past that maximum point that we could live to. A couple other points here that Lama Tsongkhapa points out in this one too, in terms of how to meditate on this. He quotes this verse from the Lalita Vistara, the Sutra of Extensive Play, where he says, the three existences are impermanent like autumn clouds. The birth and death of migratory beings resembles a show, like a play. The passage of life of migratory beings is like the flash of lightning in the sky. It passes like water cascading down a steep mountain. And so then he says this line, which I think is interesting. He says, "For someone with the resolve of inner contemplation, there are no external objects that do not point out impermanence to him or her." And so what he's saying there is that if you start meditating on this subject, nature itself, or the external world itself, will help you and become your teacher. And like actually, if you try it this time of year, right? Like the other day, I was looking out and thought, oh wow, like the wind blew yesterday, and today all the leaves are gone. You know, so I was looking at one whole vista, and I was like, oh, last week there were all kinds of leaves there. Now I don't see any leaves in this whole sort of hillside. Yeah.
I got a question. What does it mean by the three existences?
Three existences are that's I think.
The hungry, the ghost, and
Oh no, I think it's the form realm, the formless realm, and the desire realm.
Oh,
That's usually what I think by three exists. So it's, you know, like we're all in the desire realm, then there's the form realm and the formless realm.
oh yeah, yeah.
Being, so I think that's what that means. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so what it's saying is even the form and formless realms are impermanent. You know, those beings there live for a long time, but they also die. Yeah. But anyway, so you get the point here of nature. Like, so you could actually, if you're contemplating this point, you know, you could sit down in your meditation room and meditate, but you can also go outside, for example, and meditate, right? And, you know, so I was giving an example of a clock, right? The second hand or that, or the digital readout. But, you know, if you go look at a river, right? It's the same one. If you go look at the trees, if you go look at, you know, he gives, so one of the other examples here, you know, a cascade of waterfall, right? It's the incessant change. And so if you look around, of course, or clouds go, you know, he gives the example of clouds going through the sky, right? Whereas they're totally insubstantial. Right? Rainbow, another common metaphor they use is like a rainbow, right? It appears just for a moment through these sort of confluence of causes and conditions, and then it just dissolves. The flash of lightning, that's one that's commonly used, right? Like a flash of lightning. You know, it's like, it's there and then it's coming. Right? Another one that our own nature is our dreams, right? Like you could actually, if you look at your dreams, like they seem so, you know, when you actually you have the experience, like oh, everybody does, right? So whereas if you right when you wake up, a dream can seem like it was so real, you know, and so solid, like oh, it was really like I really saw that person. It feels like, right? And then it's like it was what's the word? Totally insubstantial. It was nothing, right? Like. Wake up in it, you may even forget it quickly, but it's like it was nothing. And the idea there actually is interesting, right? At the end of your life, life is like, right? Whereas, and isn't that true actually? Even now, if you look back at some previous period of your life, it's hard to tell. Sometimes, like I think the only difference between that and a dream is if somebody else, at least if there's one other person who was there, you can, and they're still alive, you can go say, "Do you remember that?" And that's the only difference. And then if that person dies, it's hard to debate. There's what's the difference between if everybody you shared a certain experience with is dead, then what's the difference between that and a dream, actually? I mean, there is some difference, I guess, but it's hard to say what the difference is, actually, right? There's nothing left.
Even if they're there, half the time they don't remember.
Yeah, sorry, too. They don't even remember that. Yeah, and then you say, well, maybe it was a dream. I don't know. You know, and again, also places, right? Like, he's saying all of the world is reminded of this, right? Like, you know, so if you go to places that are ruins, right? The ruins of great civilizations, right? And then if you look at, again, like this is, you can check the grasping at permanence, right? Like if you look at the Capitol building, well, now they're repairing it, right? Like, actually that's a reminder of permanence. Once they finish repairing it, then you'll think, oh, it'll seem permanent, right? But then it'll have to be repaired again. If they don't repair it, then that's when it'll fall down. But it will fall down. It'll be ruins, you know, so will the Washington Monument. Right? If you look at the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, they seem very, especially like the Lincoln Memorial, those buildings that look very solid, right? But they're actually designed on what? The architecture is designed on ruins from Greece and Rome, right? Like so, which are crumbled. You know, so there is I'm just pointing out, I'm just elaborating on what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here. So we meditate like that. Right? And then I wanted to quote this one part. Lama Tsongkhapa quotes I think this is one of the Kadampa Geshes, Kamawa. He says, "You say nothing has come through your contemplation." So this is like, actually, remember? Oh, Jeff's not here. Remember last time Jeff and I asked the question? He kind of said, "Yeah, but how do we actually realize this?" I don't think, you know. He was kind of like saying, "How do you change?" Right? So somebody asked Kamawa that, and Kamawa, who was a Buddhist master, Kamawa said, "You say nothing has come about through your contemplation, but when did you contemplate? During the day you indulge in distractions, and at night you sleep. Don't lie." It's quite funny. So what he's saying is you won't get, if you say, I thought, because oftentimes actually, especially with impermanence of death, people say that. They were like, I've thought about impermanence of death for years, and it hasn't changed I'm still, I still have egocentric agendas, and I don't really focus on spiritual. And what he's saying, actually, really, you might even say that yourself sometime. But then what he's saying is, okay, hold on, introspect for a minute. When did you actually contemplate? You say, well, yeah, like, remember in class I heard the person talk about it, and one time I noticed a leaf falling, and I kind of thought, oh, yeah, it's like, gosh, and that didn't change you? And he's like, then you're lying, right? He's saying, because what he's saying is you have to think about it sincerely and deeply for a period of time for it to impact your being, right?
Yeah, even if you go and read the line before, he even says that there is no benefit in considering it once in a while.
Yeah.
Like, so it relates to exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll say, oh, go ahead, yeah.
No, I was going to say, getting back to the difference between life and a dream.
Yeah.
Thinking back to a philosophy class about 20 years ago, Rene Descartes
Mhm.
had contemplated the same thing, and his answer was that life picks up where it left off in the previous day, and dreams do not.
Interesting.
That's a good one.
Well, that's part of and that's part of the contemplation here is at death it doesn't though.
No, it doesn't.
Right? When you die, it doesn't pick up again where it left off. And so that's why they sometimes say, like, at the moment of your death, this whole life that seemed very important to you, and that, you would have killed somebody over, or you would have, whatever, all kinds of, like, suddenly it seems, like the wealth and the friends and the family and like, at that point, at the moment of death, yeah, a really good point. It doesn't pick up where it left off. And then at that point, it fades like a dream, in a sense. It's part of that's another way of contemplating this.
So probably the illusion light comes very true at that point.
Yeah,
So doesn't that mean that death is one of the dream?
that would be a Buddhist person. Actually, Buddhism would say that they're all dreamlike. That life is dreamlike, death is dreamlike, rebirth is dreamlike. That would be a Buddhist perspective, actually. Yeah. I'll share one more. I'll share a personal thing. I remember, just this share, it's reminding me of something, which is like, oftentimes, speaking with Yume Kensei Rinpoche, some of you have met, he teaches at the center regularly. There have been numerous times, because I've known Rinpoche somewhat closely, and there have been quite a few times where, like, so I say this, like something that I and others felt was very serious was happening, like something upsetting that was serious was happening. I remember looking at Kensei, and like, even if it was like, things like, I don't know what the word is, where like somebody's livelihood was in risk, or that kind of thing, including his own, like his visa status at one point, for example, was at risk. And everybody else felt it was like, you get upset. Like it's like a big emotional investment. I remember looking at Kensei Rinpoche and how he was reacting to it. I was like, he's reacting as if somebody's saying, "Oh, I had a bad dream last night." Like, but he was part. It's like his own. It's like it had no more. I was like looking at him and realizing he had no more emotional investment or upset about it than I would. Like if I had a dream that if I had a dream that I was going to lose my whatever, like house or something, and I woke up from that dream, I'd be more upset than he was, like, in the moment as it was actually happening to him. And I was like, oh wow, if you meditate on impermanence, you don't suffer. And then like when it's past, of course, this is what struck me then, like a year later, I'm talking to the people who were upset. Right? At that point, they're not upset anymore. They say, oh yeah, that's funny, isn't it, that happened? But at the time, they were like, couldn't sleep, or like, blood pressure went up, they were like, and then like a year later, they're like, oh, that's no big deal. I was like, oh, Kensei Rinpoche was the same when it was happening and a year later. Like, at the time he would laugh, and a year later he would laugh. And I was like, oh, that's the difference between somebody who has and hasn't realized impermanence. If you realize impermanence, then when the things that upset most people happen, you don't get upset. So you're free, actually. Now, that was just an experience. I remember watching him through processes like that. I remember one time people were arguing about something. Like a number of people were arguing. They were really upset about some issue. And they came to him and they said, like, he says this, and I say that, and this other person says this. Who's right? And I remember, and like it involved Rinpoche. Rinpoche was just as involved in the issue being discussed as anybody else. And they all looked at him with like this extreme, like their faces were red, the way people get. I remember him just, he started laughing hysterically where he, like, you know, like when you fall over because you're laughing so, he was just laughing, like, he couldn't breathe for a while, he was laughing so, and then he kind of, he was sort of like, and basically his answer was, you're all wrong because you're grasping in the wrong way at the situation or something. Anyway, it gives you a kind of freedom, this contemplation. But so you get the idea, so you can meditate in any of those ways, but what, you know, as Gabe pointed out, right? What Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is, if you want to actually achieve that kind of state, right, of really changing yourself, you know, then you can't meditate every now and then, you can't just meditate. Oh, and that was the other point I was going to say, is the advice at this point, that's not in the text, but that is the oral instruction really, is that is to meditate every morning on impermanence of death, actually. And that over time then, if you do that every day, daily, you know, if you spend some time every day, and not just, and when they say meditate, they don't mean like think, yeah, someday I'm going to die, and then move on. That's not the meaning of meditate on impermanence. It would be to actually meditate on it, then it will change you. Does that make sense? So you have to spend time with the material.
You mean meditating every morning on impermanence or on death?
On this 9 points. So the death, yeah. Sorry. On the 9-point death meditation. To do that every day is the advice. Okay, and the third of these three, right? So the first point was the certainty of death, and that is 3, right? So we've gone through two out of the 3. So now the third one is you die without having had time to practice Dharma while alive. And what this one is saying is this, is so you might, like, again, if you check yourself, right? This is, I just want to say, because again, this is not about somebody else, it's about our own internal experience, way of experiencing reality. So actually, if you check, right, these things, so there's no place, the first one, right, there's no place I can go and nothing I can do to escape from death. Then the second one, right, that my lifespan is continually diminishing. Right, so then if somebody says to me, therefore, you better practice Dharma, you really should practice. Right? Actually, to be honest, right, the first feeling that comes up is, yeah, I should do that, I will do that sometime. Definitely, you're right, at some point I'm going to do that. Right now I have to go to the bank or I have to go to the grocery store, but I'm going to do that, you know. And so this point is addressing that. Right? Actually, check though for yourself. It really does. You'll see that sometimes that'll happen, right? If you start thinking someday I'm going to die, right? Then you'll think actually really it will come. If you say so, I should focus on my spiritual practice. I mean, sometimes you might feel yes, I'm going to, and you really do. But oftentimes what will come up is, yeah, you know, when I am done with this, or after my trip, or when and actually whatever it is, right? So if you're about to take a trip, that's after that trip I'm going to do that. You know, if you're planning a retirement, after I retire I'm really going to focus on it. If it's like if you're having some kind of, you know, if your kids, right? Yeah, as soon as the kids get out of high school and go off to college, that's when I'm going to, whatever, you know. So there's always something like, and so this point is to address that psychological issue, and what this point is saying is this: it's saying actually the way they really often, I mean, Tsongkhapa says it this way too, but he says it's inappropriate to think that you have time, and there are different ways of calculating this, but actually there's one verse that's not in this; it's in some other Lamrim text. But Guntang Rinpoche says something like, "The first 20 years of your life, you don't have any thought of practicing the path. The middle 20 years of your life, you think, later I'm going to practice the path. And then the last 20 years of your life, you think, it's a shame it's too late to have practiced." He said many people's life, and then he says, that's your biography. That's your spiritual biography, autobiography, I guess, or whatever. Like, the point is this, is that, so you may say, okay, like, so if you have a maximum lifespan of 100, but most of us aren't going to live to 100, right? And then what they're really getting at is this, is so, first of all, like the early part, first, you know, when you're 5 or, I mean, we'll see in the afternoon, Lama Tsongkhapa is an exception. He was doing retreats at 6 and so on. But for most of us, they're not like Lama Tsongkhapa. The early part of our life, there's absolutely no possibility to practice, right? And that's true, actually. If you check for yourself, when did you first when did you first even awaken to the question of how to practice a path to enlightenment, or something like that, right? So the early part of our life is lost to Dharma practice, right? Then Lama Tsongkhapa points out, when you're very elderly, your mind and body aren't strong enough to practice Dharma, right? There comes a point, and actually I'll just say this is really true, right? There are many people I know who like really want to practice. They come to a point where, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day who was like, what's he say? He thought he would be able to practice longer, but he's in his 70s and he's got extreme chronic pain. You know, and he said, I can't even sit. He says, I want to sit to meditate, I can't. My body can't sit. I have to go. He said, I sit down and after a few minutes I have to go lay down. And my mind is like distracted because of the pain. And he said, so even though I deeply want to practice, he said, I no longer have the ability, actually. You know, he said, of course I can still pray or I can still, you know, recite some mantras or something. But in terms of really practicing, he said, I just can't do it. Like, my body won't allow it anymore. So it's true. And he has, you know, he's not poor. He lives in a nice house. He's in California. There's good medical care. But he was saying, I go from doctor to doctor, and nobody has a solution. They say, you know, what's their answer? It's a chronic condition. Sorry, you can take. If you don't want pain, you can take enough medication so that you can't think clearly. Then you will have less pain, but you won't. Then you still can't practice, right? So like if we have the wrong idea, I'll wait till I'm old to practice Dharma. Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, and it's true. There comes a point where your body, if you're still alive, you can't do it. And then he's saying, in the middle, like when you have this period where you're still healthy, one issue is a certain number of hours a day you're sleeping. And most of us can't practice in our, again, if you, Lama Tsongkhapa's biography, he practiced in his sleep, most of us aren't capable of that. Right? So you can't practice when you're asleep. Right? And then, are you capable of integrating Dharma into when you're eating? Most of us aren't able to, right? Like some people can, they meditate while eating, but most of us, while eating, we're focused on eating. Right? And then you have all these other things, right? Like family, or work, or brushing your teeth, and again, you have to ask yourself, well, am I capable of, some people, like great yogis, they meditate while doing all those activities, right? But are you able to or not, right? And so you come down and you say, so how much time do I actually have? Like, and then if you have a job, like can I integrate the Dharma really into my work? Like not just where I say a prayer at the beginning of the day and then I'm distracted all day and then I say a prayer at the end or something. Some people say, oh, I'm trying to integrate Dharma, and that's better than nothing, but that's not actually practice, right? And so, what's I was saying? So then one's left, like, whereas if you're, the early part of your life you can't practice, the late part of your life you can't practice, when you're asleep you're not practicing, and then you have all these other activities, right? And then he says, then how much time is left, right? You know, I've read some people on this contemplation, they say, well, maybe out of the entire lifetime, you know, maybe there's like 5 years. Some people it's less, right, where I could practice. And then they say, and then when you're practicing, do you even focus well, right, during that time? And so, you get the idea, the feeling is, wow, it's like it's slipping away, right? This light, I mean, that's the feeling you get, is like, not like I'm going to do it later, right? But like, really feeling like, oh wow, it's like, remember the precious human rebirth feeling, right? We got to that point where you say, in that meditation, that this life form you have is the best one in the universe for practicing the path to enlightenment. Right? And then this one, again, the idea is just to have a correct, this is not like, what's the say? It's not to build up an artificial construction here. It's to recognize reality. Whereas if you say, no, I know that I have years and years and years and I can just relax and I don't have any distractions. And if that's what you realize at this point, good. But what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is check out the reality of your situation, right? In other words, like if you say, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche doesn't sleep at night. Okay, so he can say, okay, I have the 8 hours everybody else is sleeping, I can meditate on the path. But if I check myself, I do sleep at night, so I'm not in that situation, you know. I mean, you have to check for yourself, right, accurately. And what he's saying is, if you start to check deeply on this point, you'll realize, wow, there's hardly any time to practice Dharma. So I don't want to waste it, and I don't want to wait, you know, to do it. That's the idea here. And so by contemplating those 3 reasons, they call them, or 3 contemplations, on this first point of the certainty of death, remember I said that each point has its own decision. Right? So the decision here is, it's necessary for me to practice Dharma. And there is and that's not just intellectual. It's like the idea is you keep contemplating these points until you feel, I want to practice something positive. I want to make meaning. I want to take the essence of this life. I want to make this life meaningful. And there's a feeling of urgency. Actually, I'll just read this one line because it's in line with what we were saying. Lama Tsongkhapa says here, since it is like this, right, meaning our existential situation, at the time of death, all the excellences of this life will be only an object of recollection, like the recollection of a happy experience in a dream after you've woken up. Right? That was exactly what we were saying earlier. So he says, why delight in being beguiled by the affairs of this life, if the enemy of death will certainly come? With that thought in mind, you should make the decision that you must definitely practice Dharma, and to reiterate this innermost feeling many times. Does that make sense? So the idea here is that you start, you're cultivating a kind of a resolve, actually. Right? That's sort of, because, and I want to say one more thing about that. Why cultivate that resolve? One is you're trying to be realistic, right? But the other reason is that whoever you are, right, there are going to be influences in your life that could or that would tend to draw you towards distraction. That's certainly true, right? And so it was on this point, he said, what Lama Tsongkhapa is getting at is, if you really want to practice Dharma, you have to have a firm resolve. Because actually, check for yourself, right? In other words, people aren't going to say to you, the reality, especially in our society, people aren't saying to you, please practice more Dharma, please go meditate more, right? That's not the influence of the world. Right? Please go achieve enlightenment, right? Whereas that's not the influence we're getting, right? Whereas from our family, from our friends, from the media, from, nothing, right? There's all the input is towards desire, actually, right? Or maybe sometimes it's towards anger, towards hatred. There's some influences, right, saying don't hate somebody else. But most of it's towards desire. So we need that firm resolve if we're going to practice. Does that make sense? And I'll say that too, so we say this, again, I'm just sharing, to me, this resolve, I'm just sharing examples. I remember once, many times we were like this, but I'm just giving Gime Khenso Rinpoche as another example, where I remember, at one point, he was at my house and he was giving, a teaching to a small, there were, some people came and asked for a particular explanation. So he explained this Dharma topic. And then afterwards, there was, a little bit of discussion about the Dharma topic, and Rinpoche was chatting, they were asking questions, and there was some discussion about the Dharma topic. And Rinpoche was very focused, you could see he was just the way Khenso Rinpoche is, he was very present and very focused on them and really engaging with them on the Dharma and discussing that. And then gradually, as that sort of, that discussion kind of dwindled down, and then the people started, they were just, normally they sort of came like normal people, just some discussion about normal, everyday matters, worldly matters. And as soon as that happened, as soon as the discussion turned to worldly matters, Khenso Rinpoche smiled very sweetly and got up and went up and meditated. He went up to his room to meditate. And I was like, oh, okay, that's what, if you realize this point, that's how you live, right? It wasn't rejecting the person, it wasn't being rude to the person, it was well, thank you so much. Go. I remember that also with, I've mentioned Lama Zopa, she doesn't sleep, right? But I've noticed the only time Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche stayed at my house a few times. He really does. He really does. Maybe he sleeps 5-10 minutes a day. But I remember a couple of times where I've seen where people started talking about normal topics, and it really cracked me out because Rinpoche's always meditating, and then somebody started talking about money or something, and suddenly Rinpoche, and he said, oh, I gotta go, and then he went upstairs, and then he woke up and went up and started meditating, and he was totally awake. But I felt oh, okay, that's funny. The only time he fell asleep was when people were talking about finances. But that's that kind of resolve, is my point. In other words, where it's the opposite of a normal person, right? Normal people, we mostly focus on what? Entertainment, worldly matters. We save 5 minutes for Dharma or something. If you do this, you get the opposite. we're on time. Okay, I guess that, well, so of the three main points, that's the end of the first point, the certainty of death. Any questions or comments about that before I go on to the next point? I always like to pause on this.
Taking one step back, what do you mean by practicing Dharma? It means including meditation, right?
Yeah.
And what are the other aspects?
What's that?
What are the other aspects of practicing Dharma? You mean keeping vows, precepts, and all those things?
Yeah, there's many aspects, right? So it could, everything from, the main aspect of practicing Dharma, of course, is transforming our mind, right? From having afflictive emotions like anger, jealousy, craving, to having positive states like wisdom, compassion, loving kindness. That's the main point of practicing Dharma. But then within that, of course, there are many activities. So like, so also it includes like meditation, it includes keeping our vows and commitments. It also includes, doing the preliminary practices, like so making offerings, with a good motivation, of course, not just going through the motions, but or doing prostration, all those preliminary practices that we went through, the seven limb practice, but all that has to be with good motivation. It can also be with good motivation helping others, And one other point I'll make is if you really are doing this, then, and we got through, this is in the Lamrim even, is if somebody's really doing this practice, then even when they're, what's they say it? For some, I always laugh. For some of us, like for somebody like sometimes, for example myself, sometimes even when I'm sitting down like this to practice Dharma, I'm not practicing Dharma because I'm distracted. I'm thinking about some other issue. But then for a real Dharma practitioner, it's the opposite. So like even when they're in the shower, right, they're doing Dharma practice. Right? They're imagining like nectar coming from Vajrasattva and they're reciting Vajrasattva mantras, for example. Even when they're eating, right, they're offering to the Buddha in their heart or something. So then even for somebody who's really realized this, then even their ordinary daily activities become Dharma because of their mental, the power of their mind, right? So in other words, like, and that's through this inner commitment to Dharma, that, their inner commitment to their spiritual practice, so that even when they're doing ordinary activities, their mind is engaged in that. Yeah, so. Yeah, any other about this? Okay, then the second root point, or the second of the three main points, they call it sometimes the second root, is is this point, it is uncertain the time when I will die. And before we get into the three reasons for this one, Lama Tsongkhapa makes a certain point, actually. There are three reasons, but before he gets into those, he makes a certain point here. Excuse me. And his point is this. He's sort of doing a preliminary to the three reasons. And that preliminary point is his advice, and this is one that you can do every day, actually. I said meditate every day. You can meditate on all 9, but at the minimum, he says, the advice will be to do this, is to think, the way he puts it, I will die today. Right? So to actually think, you could either think, I will die today, or very good chance today's the last day of my life, something like that. And he says here, if the mind leans towards the idea of not dying, with the thought, I will not die today, you will constantly prepare for staying in this life and will not prepare for future lives. Due to this, in the meantime, if you are seized by the Lord of Death, you'll die in anguish. And what he's getting at there is this, is he's saying, most of us, right, he said, actually, most people never think, I'm going to die today. Actually, even when people die, even on the day people die, most people don't think, I'm going to die today, right? And most of us don't think that. And what he's saying really is this, is if you don't think I'm going to die today, right, then you probably won't practice much. And then there will come a day when you do die, and you'll die with regret because you never practiced. Then he's saying, on the other hand, if you think, if you have the thought, today's very likely today's the last day of my life. What he's saying is that then, if you do die that day, which is possible, you'll have mental peace because you'll have prepared well. If you don't die that day, all the better. In other words, you'll still have done virtuous, positive things, and the more days you have like that, the better. And on the day when you do come to die, whatever that day is, you'll be well prepared. And so he's saying there's no loss and only gain from thinking, I'm going to die today. And so, so he's saying that's a really helpful thing for your practice, actually, is to sort of, when you wake up in the morning to think, okay, so you can actually do it, I mean, he just says very simply, right, I'm going to die today, think like that. But actually, you could elaborate a bit, right? So if you think, okay, today may be the last day of my life, right? It's quite likely that today could be the last day of my life. Then you ask yourself, so how do I want to spend today? What do I want to focus on today? Right? How do I want to interact with my life today? If today's going to be the last day of my life, how do I want to be? Right? That's a really nice question, actually, right? And you ask you, so what he's saying is, as you're laying there, when you first wake up in the morning, right? This is the idea, right? So you wake up, right? If there may be some other practices you might do, if you're practicing Tantra, Vajrayana, there are some other practices you do first. But then you think, okay, so you haven't even got up yet, right? You just woke up. You think, okay, I woke up. Actually, Lama Zopa says, the very first thought is like, oh, thank goodness I woke up. Like, I didn't know if I would get it. I didn't know if I would make it to today. Many people didn't, actually, right? Many people died in their sleep. Actually, it's true, right? It's like many times that happens, right? Where, like, I've heard this story, right? So, like, a person goes to bed, like, or what's this story? Like, a couple goes to bed, and then one wakes up, the other doesn't. And then they shaking the person or something, right? Like, so the first thought is like, wow, I'm so glad I woke up. And then you actually would think, okay, so today, like, there's no guarantee it won't be the last day of my life. It's quite possible I'll die today. And then you actually, what Lama Tsongkhapa says here, so then actually you think, okay, I'm going to die today. How do I want to spend this day? What do I want to focus on? What's important to me? Right? And then actually, right, immediately it becomes, in terms of the 8 worldly concerns we've talked about, immediately becomes, well, okay, if today's the last day of my life, do I want to focus on my popularity? Like, it doesn't seem very important. Do I want to focus on gaining wealth? For what? Like, I'm leaving it behind like a dream. Do I want to focus on, like, what's the word? How people, like, the people who treat me with respect, like, I'm not going to see them again. It doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, so you go through all these different things. So then you come to, so what has value, right? If I'm going to leave everything of this life behind like a dream, then what has value today? And actually, it's pretty easy then, right? And if you ask yourself sincerely, like, what has value in that context? Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, Dharma practice, right? But actually, I mean, if you ask yourself in your heart this question, like, actually, it's definitely what you'll come to, and this is what Lama Zopa said, it's love and compassion, actually, right? In other words, and Dharma practice done out of love and compassion. If you do a Dharma practice that's done with a kind of, you're just going through the motions, that's not enough. Like, if I think I'm going to die today, it's not enough that I just sort of said some prayers while I was distracted. That doesn't happen. That's not meaningful, right? What you'd say is, I want to like do something with sincere, strong love, compassion, bodhicitta. If I do that, then if I die, I'm happy. If I live, I'm happy. Like, that's how I want to spend. You actually would feel it, right? You feel that if you really check, right? If I can do anything with like overwhelming love, like a huge amount of compassion in my heart, whatever action I'm doing like that, and then if I do some actual meditation or some service to others or some, right? And even if I'm at work, right? Like, if I'm going to go to work, like, that's fine. Like, it doesn't mean I'm going to quit my job necessarily, right? But, like, if I have this thought, right, I'm going to die today, then it's like, I'm going to be mindful of love and compassion for others each moment of my job, right? I'm going to practice, I'm going to integrate Dharma. That's what I was saying, that I'm going to integrate the Dharma. Even if I'm brushing my teeth, I'm going to integrate the Dharma into that. I'm going to integrate some awareness of something beyond this life into it, because the rest is just like a dream after you woke up. But that's what has some meaning, right? Does that make sense? So you would feel that way. And so that's like a preliminary training to this point, is to think, today's the last day of my life. How do I want to spend? How do I want to use this day in that context? Then comes the first of the 3 reasons. I'll go through these. I'll go through the 3 reasons. So the first of the three reasons for this uncertainty of death is that they're using. Actually, I think it's funny. He said. Actually, I'll read it here. The contemplation that there is no certainty with regard to the lifespan in Jambudvipa, which is why the time of death is uncertain. Jambudvipa is a name for earth. Actually, I think you could say it in Sanskrit. I always think it's funny because in science fiction movies, when they say, "Where are you from?" they would say Earth. But it's like, of course, that's just English. It seems sort of funny, as if all language. So Jambudvipa is like the Sanskrit word for this place. Anyway, what they're saying here on this point, on this planet, the lifespan is uncertain. There's a Buddhist view that in some other planets and some other existences, there's a definite lifespan. And they give an example. There's one planet where they say all the beings there live to 1,000 years and then die. And there are certain god realms where they live for thousands and thousands of years and then die. But the nature of life on this planet is that the lifespan is definitely uncertain. And I'll just say, this one you can actually contemplate. Again, what's I say this? Actually, it's true, right? So first of all, what they point out on this point when they actually meditate, but you can relate it to your own sort of experience and observation, is that some beings, are just conceived and never even get to birth. Right? They never actually come out of the womb. Right? Other beings die in infancy, and some die in childhood. There's beings die at all different ages, and oftentimes, actually, it's interesting. If you yourself relate to your own lifespan, again, this is just checking. I'm just getting at the unconscious assumptions we have. Oftentimes, we think of when you think of your own lifespan, you usually think of people. When you think how old will I live, you think of people older than you. Right? You think, oh well, so and so lived to 75. This other person lived to 85. That person lived to 90. We don't ordinarily think, wow, I'm this age now. And there are so many people who died, if you think of a childhood cancer center, right? Every day there are kids dying, right, of cancer. It's unbelievable I've lived this long, actually, right? And I don't have any more, what's what we say, it's I'm not somehow inherently more worthy than them, right? I'm just lucky I'm still alive. So many people die in early adulthood, right? You probably know people, right? There is where somebody, some die, they say they're a young child. Others die as a teenager, right? Then there are people, they just had their first kids, right? They're young babies, and then they all different things, an aneurysm, cancer, or whatever. There's all these different causes. Then boom, the person dies, and so, what's we say this? If you think of people who have died younger than you, actually, it's quite helpful in this sense, right? For this contemplation, to realize I'm lucky to have even made it this long. It really is. In other words, and every day, people who are my age now die, of course, right? Every day, people who are my age and who don't have the label dying, die, right? It's not they're. Of course, some people are in the hospital and they're my age, and then they have some illness and they die. But also, every day there are people my age who are walking around and then they just have a heart attack or have a stroke or have an aneurysm or get killed by random sort of mass shootings, get killed by terrorism, get killed by car wrecks, get killed by we'll get into that next point. But the point being, oftentimes there's a feeling that comes. I'm just trying to get at what this is. The contemplation is just what we just said, right? In other words, there is no fixed lifespan. I could die anytime. Many people have died younger than me. That's the nature of life on this planet. And if you check in yourself, there's oftentimes some feeling, almost I should be. If you've accepted that you're going to die, right, from the previous point, if you check, there's oftentimes some feeling in you, I should live till. I should be able to have till right? And when you plan for, actually it's interesting, if you plan for some people don't plan, but if you plan for retirement, right? So, actually you can check, right? So somebody will say, we have to do the math, right? How long do you expect to live, right? nobody says till Thursday or something. You know, I expect to live till next week. Nobody answers their retirement planner that way, right? Like, you have some assumption, right? Oh, maybe, hopefully, or you might say hopefully till, right? Or my relative, you know, like my relatives live till, but you know, some like, well, first of all, not all your relatives live that long, right? And some of your relatives died younger than you are now, right? In your own family, you know. So the idea here is you actually contemplate this point. But you see what I'm getting at? Like, one is you just contemplate in general. The other is you could check, what's my assumption? You know, I have some internal sort of idea. And that idea is not, it's not promised to me. And I don't, you know, you may even feel I deserve that. You don't deserve that any more than that child. You know, if a child can die in a cancer institute, then I don't deserve anything particular. I'm lucky to get whatever day I get. That child was innocent, probably more so than me. Each day I get, I'm lucky to have it. I should use it well. You see, that's the idea here. So it's quite helpful to think of those things, though. To think of people who died younger. Think of somebody who just had children and passed away. You know, they were just like 20-something years old, whatever. Think of that, a teenager, right?
Actually, there's a saying by Mahatma Gandhi, and that's pretty profound. He said, "Live as if you're going to live, learn as if you're going to live forever. Live as if you're going to die tomorrow."
That's the same.
Yeah,
It's the same idea. He's similar. The next point I already started to touch on, but the next of these three reasons or three contemplations is the contemplation that there are many conditions that lead to death and few that promote life. There are many quotes like this in Buddhism. One is from the Arya Nagarjuna said, "We live amidst the conditions for death, like a butter lamp in a gale, right, in a storm." That was his poetic metaphor for this. He also said, "There are many conditions for death. Those for living are only a few. Even they may well be deadly. Therefore, always practice the Dharma." And so this point, right, that there are many conditions, it's just to sort of, again, like, you can see how, it's just trying to counter, like, even after that previous point, check for yourself, right? There are these feelings, like, it's hard to accept, basically. So it's giving different reasons to convince your own subconscious of the truth, right? So the idea here is, first of all, there are many conditions and I can't escape them and I'm subject to them and they could cause my death, right? So you go through floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, you know, they're all the list of natural disasters, right? Then there's all the list of, almost an endless list of diseases, right? And I'm not, you know, like what this is, like, and I'm not immune to that, right? Like, and then there are also all kinds of internal, right? Like, so, you know, so you could go, I mean, you know these, right? Like, and there is, but to remember also that they don't have to be, you know, like, on the one hand, there are the ones where, like, somebody's going to tell you, right? You can actually contemplate this, right? Like, in other words, every day it happens, you could think, okay, I'm like everybody else, right? So one day, I could, like, have some kind of symptom, go to the doctor says, oh, I'm going to do this test, and then the doctor calls you back in and says, I'm sorry, you have stage 4 cancer, right? But then there's the other ones where you don't have any symptoms, you just suddenly have a quick chest pain or some feeling in your head, and then you fall over and you don't ever get to go to the doctor. Right? And you contemplate, I'm not immune to any of that. Right? Whereas I don't have some magical thing that makes me different from the people who have already experienced that. I'm subject to that. So see, that's that. You know, and then, like, you know, and actually, like, it's funny, you know, like, for somebody who's not practicing the spiritual path, right, when you hear of, like, when somebody hears of the, I'm just giving an example in the news right now, right, like, you hear of a mass shooting, right? And the feeling, actually, and the feeling is exactly what Lama Tsongkhapa said. Well, first of all, the feeling might be outrageous and like that, but if you relate it to yourself, the feeling is exactly what Lama Tsongkhapa said this contemplation should not be, right? There was just an ordinary fear, right? Like, oh no, I'll lose my stuff and my family, and I want to have my stuff, you know, stuff including relationships. Like, what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying right, is or if you're a spiritual practitioner, you think, that could happen to me tomorrow. I could be somewhere, actually somebody could walk through the door, right? We're a Buddhist center, somebody might think, I don't like Buddhists, somebody can kill. Right, like, what was the last one was on a mental health center, whatever, it could happen anywhere, right? And the idea is not like, so there is to think I'm somehow immune to that, that's foolish, right? Like, there is, and to think I can prevent that, you don't have any prevent that, right? The idea is, okay, then I want to practice today, right? Then I want to live this day with love and compassion and bodhicitta, because that's what I have control over. Right? I don't have control over not having an aneurysm. I don't have control over on the way home today, if I stop somewhere, I don't have control over that somebody won't shoot me. What I do have control over is how I live my day, and how I spend my mind, how I use my mind today. And you can feel, like if you start to feel that, there's a resolution. Do you feel how like you start to get a resolution in yourself? If you really think that, then you start to resolve, I'm not going to waste 5 hours. I'm not going to waste 2 hours. Because that really is true. You know what I mean? Whereas if you don't feel that, then you think, after lunch. See what I'm getting? If you don't feel that, then you think, like after lunch, maybe I'll still do some practice, or if I have an hour later on in the day, maybe I'll spend an hour or 45 minutes, or at least half an hour on something meaningful, right? Whereas if you feel this, on the way home I may get killed, then there's some feeling of like really resolving in your heart. Then when I'm driving, I'm gonna practice. You know what I mean? Even while I'm walking to my car, I'm gonna practice. You see what I'm getting at? That's the feeling of a resolve. One other point that Lama, that Nagarjuna here said, I just want to point out, is he said even the causes of life can become causes of death. And that's again like there's some, so we say it, like it's undermining that feeling of insulating yourself, right? So you may feel, other people can, like yes, it's true, and like I don't know for sure, but I have good health insurance, and so that might be your feeling that comes up, but actually, if you read the statistics, there's quite a large number of deaths come from medical mistakes. So going to the doctor can be a cause of death, actually, right? And then if you feel like, yeah, but I eat healthy, right? Well, actually, like, what's the word say it? Is that E. coli, like in other words, so you may get like organic meat and then you get E. coli from it or something, right? Or you may buy like organic vegetables and then they could have something. So even the point getting there is that even the things we do to stay alive can cause our death. Right? So don't think, like in other words, to think, oh, I have this, therefore I'm insulated from that, or I'm somehow protected. What they're getting, the same thing. Like I remember that. Like somebody was telling me a story. Like, I exercise. I remember that, and again, exercise is good and all that. But I remember somebody saying like their relative had gone out for a run, came home from their run and sat down to drink water, and while they were drinking the water after their run, they died. And so the point is not to not do those things. I mean, eat organic vegetables if you want, and exercise is good. The idea is there is nothing. Like in other words, there is nothing that ultimately isolates you or protects you from death. And the last of these three contemplations is the contemplation that my body is extremely vulnerable. Usually they say like a water bubble. It says that here. And you actually contemplate like that, right? So you actually meditate, feeling my body is like a water bubble. Like it's that impermanent. And again, check your self-image, right? Oftentimes our self-image is like, if you're feeling sick, you may feel that way. But if you're feeling healthy, you feel sort of solid. But actually it's true, right? Like there is, so we say it, like, so the mosquito, right, that has a certain thing, disease in it, right? I mean, if it bites you, then you can die, right? If it has like dengue fever or what is that one? I forget all the names of those disease, right? Malaria, different things, right? Then you die. Then you can die. They gave the example of a little thorn, right? It's actually true, right? In other words, like you ever had like, I remember one time I just had like the tiniest cut on my foot, just like a little scrape. I think I had been doing something, I don't know. I just got the tiniest little scrape, but it got infected. It got blown out, and then the doctor, you could die from it. The doctor said you might die. You could die from that. It was just the tiniest little. It was like little, like tiniest thing, but the doctor said, oh, you might die, you have to take, do this and do that. Or something. The idea is like the littlest things, right? And actually it's quite true, right? I remember what, like, so I say, like the person looks, like, feels totally like they're healthy and strong, right? But if they have the size of an aneurysm is so little inside their body, right? But if that bursts, like a little tiny bubble, right? But if that bursts, then they die within like a minute, right? Less than a minute. Or like, when they show like, somebody has like, what's it called, bypass surgery, and then, right, the stuff that they're taking out, the plaque that's inside the artery, it's actually minuscule, right? It's this little tiny thing, but it'll kill the person, right? And actually a germ, and then like a germ, right? One germ, it's actually right? You can't, it's smaller than we can see with the naked eye, right? You need a microscope to see it. But if that gets in you, then right, you can die. So the idea here is you contemplate like that. And then actually there's a funny thing where it says, basically it says this, like, eventually the entire planet is going to, it's pointing out, scientifically this is true, actually it's funny, it was written by Nagarjuna over 1,000 years ago, and scientists will agree with it, right? They say eventually the planet itself is going to burn up, right? When the sun expands. And so he's saying, what Nagarjuna says is this entire planet someday is going to be burned to dust by the sun. Don't think your body's going to last. Like, if you think your body's going to last forever, get over it. Nagarjuna doesn't say get over it. It's kind of what he's getting at. But the idea here is, so when you're meditating, right, is you meditate until you feel like your body is, you feel the sense of your body, the truth, right, which is your body's fragility. The fragility of your life. Right, and so you've contemplated these 3 points, right? So that lifespan on this planet is unpredictable, and people die at all different ages, including childhood, including my current age, right? You feel that. Then there's so many causes and conditions that can lead to my death. And actually, you can see how there's a sequence, right? One is there's sort of more distant, like people can die at any age. Then like all these different things can happen that can cause my death suddenly at any moment. And then finally you get to the point where you're feeling like my body is like this fragile water bubble that can burst in an instant, which is true. These are all realistic things. And the idea, again, remember, because we're not doing this in the context of just getting depressed or something, but the idea here is that the decision, right, because again, now it's the second decision. The first decision was, I'm going to practice Dharma. The second decision is more intense, actually, a more intense inner commitment and resolve, which is, so again he says, reiterate many times the innermost decision to practice Dharma from this very moment on, for it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by the Lord of Death. And then he says, among the 3 roots, the thought about the uncertainty of the time of death, this contemplation, is the most important one, which is why you should put effort into it. So he's saying of all these different contemplations, this is the most important for inner transformation. And so what he's getting at there, right, is this idea that, and I just want to say this, like, even if, if you, for those of you who, right, if you're here, you have some interest in Dharma practice. I want to say something about this because it's really quite important, is like, we all have some interest in this, right, in Dharma, in spiritual path, and Dharma practice. And then like, to some extent, we may find ourselves like with that interest, but then we may find, well, but I'm not really practicing very profoundly. Or if you find like yourself saying, wow, like 6 months went by, or a year went by, I don't feel like I transformed that much. I don't think my practice was very deep or something like that. And what he's saying is, what I'm really getting at, what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, is if that ever happens, which is normal, like may happen, right? What he's saying is, I think Lama Tsongkhapa here is being like a kind parent to us. And he's saying, if you find that happening to you, you don't have a lot of time, or you're distracted or something, use this one. He's saying, meditate on this point and that will fix it. Right? And what he's saying really is this, is like, because also, most of people here, you guys aren't living in a cave, you're not like you know, you guys aren't, I mean, if you're at this center, you're not living in a hut somewhere in the Himalayas or something, right? But what he's saying is this, is if you meditate on this point, right, this point about like the intense fragility of yourself and your life, right, of your existence in this realm, like that it could end any moment, like a bubble bursting, or like a dream ending, right? At any moment, it'll be like you woke up from a dream, and this whole life will seem, as you're going off into the intermediate state, the bardo, this whole life will seem like it was just a dream. It was nothing substantial at all. And he's saying, if you realize that, if you just focus on that, all your Dharma practice will start to have power. But because what will happen is that you'll develop this sort of unshakable resolve in yourself, actually, so that even if you're doing other things, you'll integrate the Dharma into that. Does that make sense? Like then, whatever you're doing in your daily life, if you're driving around, or you're, like, you know, and when people come, like, if you don't do this, then when life comes at you, you'll just sort of get caught up in it. You know what I mean? But if you do this, then no matter what life throws at you, you know, let me give an analogy here. Like, if you don't contemplate impermanence and death, then you'll be like a leaf in the wind, right? So like some financial thing comes and you get carried that way. Then a relationship issue comes and you get carried that way. Then like somebody says, oh, let's go to the movies, and you're carried there. And then somebody else says like, oh, I'm mad at you, and you get carried into that drama. And then somebody else has like some problem and you're caught up in the drama of that. Because you don't have that inner certainty, right? And what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is if you really contemplate this point of impermanence and death, then your Dharma practice becomes, you know, you could say solid, like firm like a mountain, or you could say like, another analogy I'll give is like a train moving at full speed, like the wind isn't going to stop that. That's my point. Like you're just going to keep going towards your goal. Does that make sense? And even if somebody else says to you, oh, like, you know, I'm really upset, did you hear about this, blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, your focus is going to be on, not that you're going to ignore the person or be mean to them, but your focus is, you know, like, so somebody comes to you with their drama, instead of getting caught up in the drama, you may focus on compassion for them. Or you may do like get Rinpoche at a certain point and go off and meditate. You know, just like you won't get caught up in it, you know what I mean? And like there's like a financial issue or something like that, you know, whatever, or a relationship issue, or, again, if you haven't practiced Dharma, you'll just get carried away in it. But if you've done this point about impermanence, you know, then you know, like, all that is going to, like, the whole drama of this relationship problem, you know, like, you know, what's sort of say? Like, if I woke up from a dream about somebody having a marital problem or a friendship problem, like, it was a dream, you know, and like, this is going to be like that for me and also for you. Like, so you won't get caught up in it. Does that make sense? You'll continue to focus on what's important in that moment. Otherwise, you waste years, actually, right? Like, have you ever had that experience where you look, I can remember, like, looking back at certain times in my life where I got, I don't know, there was, like, some issue at work, I remember one time. I remember looking back years later, there was, like, some issue at work where people were, like, upset with each other, and I got caught up, and I was like, no, my side's right, and we're gonna, and how do we strategize, and, like, and now I think back, and I'm like, who cares? Like, I don't even know those people. I don't think they care. Like, they don't care now. I don't care now. The company doesn't even exist, like, or in that place anymore. It, you know, it sold that property. It moved somewhere else. Like, who cares? You know, it's like the equivalent of like children fighting on the playground or something. Like, you know, it was like kids fighting over the, like, you know, I want the, whatever. I want this toy. No, I want this toy, and they're pulling at it. Like, it's like so silly, you know. And if you contemplate this, you start to feel that not like maybe 5 years later, but at the time you actually feel it. So you don't, you know what I mean? Like you let go of the toy, and you say, sure, you play with it for a while. You know, if you're done, I'll play with it later, right? So you don't grasp in the same way. And what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying is, if you meditate on this one point, it'll help like that. If you don't, it won't. And I'll say one other comment about that. I remember, I think I said this once before, but it's exactly the same thing Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, but in different ways. Like that was what like Rinpa Rinpoche used to say that quite a bit about this point. He was one of my teachers, and he used to, like, you know, he actually did live in huts and caves and things like that. You know, he went off and did those things. But even when he was in the world, he was the same. Like, in other words, if he was traveling around, you know, wherever he was, whether he was in a hut in the middle of nowhere in Tibet, or if he was in a mansion, I mean, you know, his attitude was the same, but it was because of this, in part. And he used to say that. He used to say, the main thing that helps you practice, the main thing that keeps you on track, or that, actually, the main energy for practicing Dharma, he said, was meditation on impermanence. And he said that's really what keeps people, that's what allows you to practice, really, is this meditation. And he said, so focus your energy on this meditation. And all the other ones then will, you know, and I'll say one other thing too. It's just funny, you know. Is like sometimes people will say, I don't have time to meditate on impermanence. I think it's funny. Like, I'm too busy to meditate on impermanence. That seems really funny. You know, like, I'm very busy. I don't have time for that. But actually, it's interesting. If you meditate on impermanence, then you have time to do all your other practices. Does that make sense? Like, if you don't meditate on impermanence, then you don't have time for any of your practices. Like, then you're too busy to do any other. If you take time to meditate on impermanence, then somehow you find time to do all the other ones.
It's like a height of stupidity.
Yeah, it's really fun. I will meditate on impermanence, but I'm too busy today. I'll do it tomorrow. That's fun. I'll meditate on death tomorrow. That's fun. But it is true, actually, right? If you meditate on this topic, then you have time for all your other practice. You know, like if somebody says, I don't have time to practice Dharma, it means they haven't practiced this, right? Whereas if you practice this, then you somehow do have time for Dharma. And it doesn't matter, like, you know, look at, again, like, you know, if you, I mean, sometimes they'll say if you meditate on this well, you may want to go off and just meditate in a hut somewhere, like Rinpoche did first time. But you can also be in the world and you'll practice Dharma, right? Like, look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? I mean, actually, if you feel I have too many responsibilities to practice Dharma, then just compare yourself to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You know, like, whereas he's the best practitioner of Dharma. There's nobody better than him at practicing Dharma. But there's nobody who has more, or is like, he has more or less than the President of the United States or whoever, but I mean, his list of responsibilities is endless. You know, he's flying all over the world, and he's traveling on airplanes all the time to teach here and there, and he's representing the people in exile. You know, so if, you know, sometimes if I just use that as an example for myself. If I think, oh, I'm too busy, I have too many responsibilities right now, then I think that's ridiculous. You know, it means I haven't meditated on impermanence and death. Right? If you meditate on impermanence and death, you can't have too many responsibilities. You know, and like family demands or work demands or whatever they would be. So if you're thinking that, right, if you think, yeah, I want to practice Dharma, but I have too many other demands on me, that means you haven't meditated on impermanence and death today. Right? And there's one more quote, like one Kadampa Geshe said, if you don't meditate on impermanence and death in the morning, then by the afternoon you'll have too many desires to practice Dharma. And what he's getting is this, right? In other words, if you don't meditate on impermanence and death in the morning, then you'll get caught up in some idea of something that you think you have to do, right? That you'll think is important, you know. And we have all different ideas of what's important, right? And again, like, so what I'm just suggesting, the last thing I'll say, and then we'll go on to, is again, compare your ideas of what's important to death. You know? Like, and actually, if you're practicing Dharma, then there won't be any different. Like, if you do that, if you're actually practicing, and again, like, practicing Dharma means really practicing Dharma in your heart, then if you say, oh, is this important even if I died in 10 minutes? The answer will be yes, I'm doing the right thing. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're doing something that's not at all Dharma, and then you say, how would I feel if I died in 10 minutes? You'll feel, oh, wow, that would be terrible. You know, like, the feeling would be like there's some, like, you don't have control over when you'll die, but you have control over that. Does that make sense? So you could do that in the morning. You could also do it throughout the day. You know, just keep checking. Like, is what I'm doing worth doing if I were going to die today? Any questions about that? Comments about that topic?
So, Dr. Lardner, maybe the first meditation in the morning should be on death and impermanence if you're doing in order.
Mm-hmm.
Would that
Yeah.
be possible?
Yeah. Yeah, many lamas, including Lama Zomershey said this, but many lamas said, they actually advise that. Many different teachers advise that, actually. Like this idea of, like I said, even before you get out of bed, to really meditate on impermanence and death. Or when you first sit up, you sit up and first thing would be to meditate on that. And that's the practice, like I said, that one Kadampa Geshe, that was the practice of the Atisha, the great Atisha, and then Dromdompa and his disciples. That's been carried down since then, and I think it was practice of others too. But was to make your first thing impermanent. This meditating on impermanence and death, to put your day in context, and then to do all your other practices. Because the idea is, I guess, if you don't do that, then maybe you don't do any other practice. But if you do that, then naturally other practices will come. So really it is a good one to do very first thing in the morning, to meditate on that. Because if you do it sincerely and over again, like Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, then it actually changes you. And I'll say that too, because some of the other meditations, like, it's actually true. This one, if you meditate it over and over again, it definitely does change us, right? Because it's so evident, Whereas if you leave off meditation on impermanence and death, like for example, there are meditations that in Buddhism would be considered like more advanced or something like that. Like it comes later in the Lam Rim, like for example, emptiness meditation, let's say, or meditation on mandalas and deities and things like that. And all those things are practices. They're treasured and valuable. But the problem is if you start off by meditating on those things, it may not even become Dharma, first of all. And they're harder to realize, and if you have meditated on impermanence and death, they just be, oftentimes like, say this, like, I'll use a term that in the West, and it has been used, in Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, created, is this idea of spiritual materialism or something. There could be some idea of, I'm doing something, and it's like, as I say, like if you don't meditate on impermanence and death, then even other Dharma practices that seem like they should be a Dharma practice can become part of our egocentric identity or idea, like, I'm doing something and it's special, or I'm doing something and it's high, or it's possible to sort of co-opt them into our egocentric life approach, so that even if you're not, caught up in your status or your relationship or wealth or whatever, like you could even make a supposed Dharma practice into just another version of egotism. But in if you think it's really hard to do that, to think I'm going to die today. Oh, that's also great. Like it doesn't allow for that. Actually, like the thought I'm fragile and any little thing may kill me. There's really no way to co-opt that into look how special I am, or look how much I am of something. Like you can't, and so I think if you do that first, then whatever other Dharma practice you do, if they get integrated into that understanding, you don't sort of turn them into another way of promoting, it could be self-promotion to others, or it could even be self-promotion in your own mind. Like sort of some idea of like promoting your own ego just in your own.
So it cut down, basically attachment is much more less.
Yeah.
The desires.
Yeah, it really works that way. And again, for someone who's realized emptiness, then emptiness does that. But for those of us where it's just, emptiness is still a bit of an intellectual concept that we haven't realized, it's harder for that to serve as powerful an antidote. But impermanence and death, because death is so...
It's real.
It's so, it's so much easier to see. That I think it's more effective for decreasing desire and things like that. Yeah, and also I'll say one other thing. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama often points out, if you think, on the one hand, right, this comes early in the Lam Rim, so somebody might think, again, remember Lama Tsongkhapa said one of the purposes of the Lam Rim stages of the path is to overcome pride and arrogance. And if somebody thinks, that's an early contemplation, I do more advanced thing. Remember, His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that I forget the number. He contemplates his own death. Was it 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times a day? It was some number of times every day. How many was it?
I think he said 6 or 8.
It's
I
a-
want to
it's a-
say it was a lot.
It's the first thing in the morning. That I know in order.
And then he does it, so
Multiple. I think it was 3.
yeah, I don't know how many, but If the Dalai Lama does it
I
many
know
times
it
a
was at
day.
least 6 because of the 6 yoga.
Oh, 6 session guru yoga?
I know, he was, because I thought, anyway, I know he was
Okay.
doing it for each one of them, and
Oh,
I
okay.
feel like maybe a couple extra.
Yeah, you do, if you do, that's part of sadhanas too. And
Yeah.
so, but anyway, the idea being that like if the Dalai Lama contemplates death and impermanence and this 9-point death meditation every day, you know, if you were to think, oh, I'll do something more advanced than that, seems funny or something.
So he did that, he does that 3 times or 6 times a day?
I forget how many.
His contemplation on death
Death, yeah.
and no emptiness? I would expect.
He does that too. I think Dalai does both. He does both, I think.
It was the dissolution is what I remember.
Yeah. Which is one way of contemplating death,
Yeah.
actually. There's a whole way of contemplating death. I'll mention that, yeah. There's a whole way of contemplating death, actually. Maybe I'll mention that here, and we'll get to the next point next time. There's one more route with 3 reasons. We'll get to that next time. But maybe I'll just say that, like, because you mentioned it, and I think it's actually, sometimes it's mentioned here, in the commentary it's mentioned here, is there's a way of contemplating death here that you can supplement. You can relate it to this, right? Where you actually meditate and you think, so you go through a meditation. There's another way of doing this meditation. At a certain point, actually, you can do it. You can do it at any of these points. Actually, you can integrate it in. It's not separate. It's part of what we've gone through. But where you actually imagine that. So you can imagine if you're doing the first set of 3, right? Death is inevitable. You can do it thinking of yourself when you're older. If you're doing the ones about the uncertainty of the time of death, you can do it today. You think of it today. But you can actually go through the whole process of, okay, so what will it be like? Right? And you imagine the whole process. You imagine so actually imagine that, right? So like, let's say at this point, you could say, I'm like a water bubble, right? That was when we left off at. Right? So you could actually meditate, like thinking, contemplating and imagining, okay, so like, I'll use the one I already did, right? So I'm on my way home and I stop off at a store, right? Like to pick up groceries. And somebody shoots me, right? So then, like, I'm in Giant, in the aisle, and I fall down. Right? And I can't move, so my face is smashed against the, what's it called? Like, what's that kind of, whatever that tile is. Like, it's not really tile, whatever that kind of floor is. Dirty floor in Giant. Right? And there are other people laying around me, too, who are shot. Right? Like, I'm just giving that as an example, right? And I can't move. Right? Like, my body won't move. And I think, what? Oh, I'm dying. Right? And then there's actually, like, so, right? And actually, and you can check. So what do I think at that point? If I've been practicing Dharma today, what do I think? If I haven't practiced Dharma, what do I think? You can check, right? And then actually there's a whole contemplation where you're, I don't want to go through the whole thing, but there's a contemplation that Jody mentioned called the dissolutions, right? But basically you think, like, your eyes close, right? And you realize, I'm never going to see anything of that, right? Like that, like my eyes just closed. I was looking at the floor, at this dirty floor in Giant, and then my eyes closed, and now I'm never going to see anything with those eyes. These eyes will never see anything of that. Right? And they say there's like a vision that happens in your mind, like a mirage. That means, and your body sort of feels very heavy, like it's sinking. Like an experience that, it's like when you're falling asleep, you feel like your body, sometimes you feel your body sinking. It's like that, only much, much more so. So this feeling of like your body sinking, and you realize, I'm never going to move again. Like, that's like, and then your ears, right? Like you start, like you hear, maybe in that context, you hear people screaming or something, right? And then slowly the sounds just fade away. And internally there's some recognition, I'm not going to hear anymore. Like, it's done, And so on. There's a whole meditation you can go through where you and there are these different visions that appear as you're done. They're Tibetan Vajrayana, tantric meditation. There's this description, so you see mirage, and then you see a vision like smoke, and your body's drying up, sort of your mouth dries out and all that. And anyway, there are these sequence of events that happen as you are dying, and then, you stop smelling, you stop tasting, you digest, all your organs are shutting down and so on, right? But there's still a little bit of breathing, right? And then there's that breath, like if you've been there when somebody's dying, right, where the in-breath becomes more shallow or harder. The out breaths become longer, right? And then there's finally a last out breath. Then you actually go through a whole contemplation. If you've been there with somebody else, it's easier to see, but it's described and, you know, figure it out. It's not hard. There's a sequence of inner visions that you can learn. You can go over it sometime if you want. It's not taught in this text, so I won't go through detail, but you imagine actually then your last breath. And actually you can even do what we say here, right? Then you can imagine, look back on, you know, as you're sort of going to the last breath, you can imagine looking back on your life, like a dream. Right? That dream is ending now. That dream-like, it's not literally a dream, but that dream-like life is ending now. And actually it's interesting, like, you know, so like, you think, I'll never see children or parents or friends, like relatives, I'm never going to see them, right? Or as a recognition arises in your mind, you know you're never going to see them again. Certainly not those bodies, anyway. You know, and all your stuff you'll never see again, right? Like the car that was in the, if you're in the Giant, right? The car that was in the, what's it called? Parking lot, that like ordinarily you'd be so worried, you know, if somebody scratched it. Like, it's not, you know, I'm done with that car. I'm done with my house. I'm done with my body, actually, right? This body that I cherish so much from the moment of my birth until now. In a few minutes, it's going to be something that like nobody wants to touch. Even. Like, it's like disgusting, right? People are scared of corpses, right? Like, in a few, you know, as you're dying, you would know that. In a few minutes, like, there's one joke. They said sometimes people worry. Actually, I noticed that, like, actually, people do. It was in the text. But actually, one day, my mother was saying that. She was saying like, "So like, I want to be cremated. Should I make plans for that?" And this one Lama said, "Don't worry when you die." Lama, it was in a text, but Lama said, "Don't worry when you die. You don't have to worry about your body getting taken away. Nobody will want you. People are frightened of it, so it'll get taken away quickly." Whereas like this body that I felt so much like feeding and worrying about, in a few moments it'll be like scary, right? It'll be like something that people are afraid of, right? And that, and then it'll be gotten rid of, buried or burnt up or something, right? So anyway, it's a way of again, it's a way to make it visceral. Does that make sense? Because you can go through a whole contemplation like that, a meditation like that, until you imagine, and then you imagine like, you know, the dissolution into the clear light of death. There's a whole process, right, where you imagine all these dissolutions until finally you experience the clear light of death. That's what they call it, the most subtle state of mind. And then then you enter the bardo, which is the in-between. Bardo is the Tibetan word, it means in-between state, right, where you're, you leave your consciousness leaves your body. From a Buddhist point of view, that's the definition of death, is the moment when the consciousness, the consciousness and the body separate and no longer are related, then that person's dead. From a Buddhist point of view, that's after the breathing. It's after the breathing has stopped. It's a little bit later than the breathing has stopped. And so you contemplate, then that will be me. Then I'll have no relationship. And then what will it be like if I think back? If I can still think at that moment, if I can still have some kind of subtle ability to, as a bardo being, and I look at that body and I think back on that life, and then I'm going to move away. Then they say then your karmic winds will blow you away from there. You'll sort of end up somewhere, somewhere else. And so that's like that moment, right? When you first wake up from a dream, right? And you think, oh, I just dreamt of that. I just dreamt of this. Right? And then you know it's going to fade in a moment. You know what I mean? Like when you just wake up from a dream and you know that your memory of that dream is going to fade unless you write it down. But you can't write it down in the bardo. There's nothing to write on. Like oh, this happened, and then it's just slipping away, right? That'll be your feeling about this whole lifetime. Oh, it's just slipping away, right? What mattered? Like what was of value then? You can actually ask yourself that. And then you imagine going off into your karma that takes you where it's going to take you. Anyway, that makes it more visceral. See what I'm getting at? And then if you stop and you say, so then how do I want to live my life? It changes, doesn't it? It definitely changes how you want to live your life. If you do that meditation, and then you say, so what do I want to do with my life? It changes it, for sure. So you see what I'm getting at there. Like that's, and then we'll get to the last point. I'll just mention the title of the last point. We'll cover it next time. which is at the time of death, nothing except the Dharma will be of benefit. So that's the last topic, which we'll cover next.